Good morning. I love it. It's DevOps, right? It's agile if we have issues that are going on and we're able to pivot and change and, with what we need to do. So good morning, Plano. Here's what I want you to do. Take out your smartphones and hit up the QR code. What that will do is it will take you to a website and you'll be able to download the presentation. There's a pretty extensive bibliography of all of the different research that I'm going to cite and share with you today. And there's also a couple of sets of questions that you'll have available to you. So, question for you. How many people here learned to drive using a paper map? All right, awesome, awesome. I was actually graded on how well I could refold the map because it was such an important asset. And I was also driving when we went through the digital transition. There was this amazing cartography information, routing algorithms that were there, and somebody realized we can put a web interface on this, and we can let people navigate their path. Print it out, take it with you. Now, if you happen to be the person that was sitting in the passenger seat, reading those directions to the driver, right? It was kind of a damned spot to be in, right? Let's look for the street sign. The next street sign, we're looking to take a right on Smith Avenue. So then the GPS units came out. It was funny that Roger and I were talking about this last night, how often the signal would go out. So when my kids learned to drive, they had TomToms, but we also made them learn how to use a map. Because you can see on that picture, well, I don't have one up here, but you can see on the picture, lost signal. But we had the sensors with us. We had purpose-built devices with us. And then 2008, what happened in 2008? The iPhone 3 released with 2 sensors, and those sensors, right, enabled GPS right on our phones along with Google, and the world exploded. All of a sudden, we had this amazing, different mentality on how we were going to navigate. And let's see if this changes. It does not change. All right, it looks like I have to be close to it. We've learned the proximity rule there this morning. So it's ubiquitous now. It's in our cars. I rode bicycle. I've got a Wahoo computer, and it's GPS enabled. And you're asking yourselves, what the heck does this have to do with software engineering? Well, it's an analogy for where we are today. We're at the digital transition. We've got amazing back-end algorithms, fantastic compute, but the front end's clunky, right? It's not smooth. We're printing it out, so to speak, and taking it with us. We're doing things in one interface and saving it and moving it over to another interface. So yes, my name is Tracy Bannon. My mama named me Tracy, but I go by Trace. I'm a software architect. I'm an engineer. I'm also a researcher. Roger mentioned that I work for the MITRE Corporation, and we are a federally funded research and development company. Our motto actually is solving problems for a safer world. What it means is that my imperative is to shoot straight with people. I'm supposed to be objective because I'm not selling anything. I'm trying to help people do the right thing. So that role has enabled me to start something called the Architecture Research Collaborative. There are a number of different thought leaders from industry, from academia. You might know a couple of those names. Patrick Dubois, right, one of the founding fathers of DevOps. Maybe you know Nathan Harvey from the DORA metrics. You might know the name Dr. Ben Amaba. He just retired as the global CTO of AI for IBM. A lesser known name, but somebody who may be in your circle would be Dr. Phil LaPlante, who has 37 books on software engineering and software development. So why bring these people together? Well, to get these diverse thought leaders together so that we can start to focus on what really matters. Yes, the tools are important, but what we need to get after are the humans in the mix. We need to be concerned about human-machine teaming and what that is going to do to us. What skills atrophy, what things change. And we're merging scholars and industry. So think about this. We know that scholarly research takes a while. It takes a long time to get through some of those academic research efforts. But look at how fast industry is churning out all of this data and all of those reports. So let's get that intersection of data at scale with research. So quick retrospective. Where were you when you heard that 100 million users were on ChatGPT? Right? All of a sudden, your social feed was filled with everything AI, and the AI everything. You had newsletters coming at you. I'm sure you're getting emails about it, kind of driving you crazy. You might even expect to go down the grocery aisle and see a sticker slapped on the cereal or on a cookie box, right? It's just everywhere. Publishing is following that trend as well. So both industry publishing and academic publishing. I just want you to see the numbers that are here. In 2022, look at that, 19 scholarly articles, and that includes some of the preprints, which means they haven't been peer-reviewed yet. 2023, 300. First 4 months of this year, almost 500. And we're on scale, we're on track to have almost 1,400 this year. So there's this massive surge, but again, the peer-reviewed materials lag, oftentimes 6 months to a year, year and a half. Why does that matter? Because good ideas that haven't been challenged, right, that haven't been thought through by multiple people, right, oftentimes don't get the same weight and don't have the same authenticity. Don't get swept away in the hype. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, is really getting swept away in the hype and giving you some ideas, some information, some data that you can take back to help you build your case for when and where you leverage AI. You've all seen this before, right? This is the Gartner hype cycle. So where do you think we are right now? Are we at the peak of inflated expectations? I know a couple of you are already in the trough of disillusionment. I'm positive because I talked to you. But where are we? I agree with Gartner this time. I don't always agree with Gartner, but at this point, I agree with them. We are still at the peak of inflated expectations. This is from August. But what I really want to draw your attention to is the plateau of productivity. Is it 2 to 5 years away? Well, the research, the interviews, the conversations, the experiments would say yes. But I want to caution you. Productivity today and the productivity that we will see in the future are going to be defined differently, right? They're going to be defined differently. Everybody loves a good word cloud, right? So I work with some of the world's leading data scientists, and I met with them. And I had a conversation, said, can you guys help me? I'd like to get a couple of slides together. Gonna be heading down to Dallas, gonna be going to Plano, having a conversation about AI and software engineering. Can you help me help everybody understand all of the different types of AI there are? Because when we say AI, most of us, or should I say most of society, actually means generative AI because they just learned about it. But it's only the new kid on the block. There are tons and tons of different types of algorithms, right? Deterministic algorithms, repeatable algorithms, and we've been using them in software engineering for a decade or more. So my only point for this slide is for you to realize that generative AI, it's a new kid on the block. Now for today, we're gonna be focusing a lot on the generative AI aspect, so you can help to cut through some of the hype. So you may have seen this slide before, but the question to you is, where can you use AI? And that's all kinds of AI. Where can you use AI within the software development lifecycle, within DevOps? I'm gonna show you the next slide. It is going to be an eye chart. If you follow that QR code, you'll be able to download it and look at it more closely. So I created this about a year ago, and my goal was to really pulse and find out, where are we using these? What are the techniques that exist right now? So tons and tons and tons of places. But again, what's important about this is that this is not specifically generative AI. These are all myriad of algorithms being applied to help us across the entire SDLC, from vision to fielded operations. So as we move forward, though, I am going to be focusing on generative AI. And we are looking to turn this into something navigable. So we can start to add use cases, user stories, how-tos to this. It's not ready yet, but it's on the horizon. So the first thing I want to talk with you about are just some usage patterns. There are patterns with how we interact, but there are also patterns of usage. These are the two big buckets, the two really big buckets of how we're using this right now. The first may seem obvious. It's content generation. Whether it's code, whether it's a document, whether it's API, whether it's a deployment script, the generation piece. But the other part is really cool and really interesting, and people don't often think of this. And it's automated reasoning. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not automated reasoning that you're not in control of. This is using those language models as a muse in a way that prompts you and helps you, right? Suggesting alternative patterns, looking for themes, right? So there's some pretty interesting stuff. But as I talk for today, as I give you some different ideas, it's going to fall into one of these two buckets. So, but first, there are some people that I work with who hate this analogy, but I won't let it go. Treat generative AI like a young apprentice. And the type of apprentice that I'm talking about is not someone who with a college degree. I'm talking about the 15-year-old. They come bounding in, they bring a lot of energy, and you're excited, right? You're excited because they're there. And sometimes they do things right, they do something insightful, but the majority of the time, you're left scratching your head, thinking, what the hell were they thinking? So we need to treat generative AI that way. And this is not just my opinion, I say, as I put on my glasses and look at my cue cards, which have many statistics on them. So every major service provider has come out and said, you need to have humans in the loop. I met with GitLab last week, and I also went out and looked at their website, and it says, incorporate human oversight, ensuring human approval for critical decisions is required. So folks understand this. There was a study by Purdue, and it shows that ChatGPT, when you're using it for software engineering questions, gets it wrong 52% of the time. Now, I'm sure you're awash in all kinds of statistics, but like I said, there is a dedicated bibliography to this where you can go out and look at these research, look at the numbers and see where they came from. But at the end of the day, you're going to see this slide throughout today because we need to be thinking about it. You see the elderly gentleman in the back, the owner of the shop, the owner of that organization is paying close attention, and that is his responsibility. All right, big question. Does the use of generative AI contradict DevSecOps principles? What do you think? The answer is sort of. Sort of, it does. So think about traceability, explainability, auditability, right? T. That's hard if something is black boxed away from you. How about reproducibility? Have you ever hit the regenerate button? Do you get exactly what you got before? No, you don't. How about security, right? The heart of DevSecOps is security. There was a survey done by Sneak, 500 developers, and they found that 56% are currently getting security issues with generated code. So security is an issue, it's an issue. And there is some interesting information that's starting to arise that's talking about collaboration, potential reduction of collaboration. How would that be? Well, if Tracy's spending her time hanging out with her AI friend, if I'm interacting with it, if I'm chatting with it, train of thought chat through the interface, I may be spending less time collaborating and talking with my team. So the way that we can get around this, or the way that we can address this head on, is humans in the loop. That'll help us stay true to those DevSecOps principles. So where are we using it today? Yeah, everybody says code gen, code gen, code gen. There's a lot of other places. Stack Overflow, I'm sure you guys have looked at both the 2023 and 2024 report, but there's some pretty interesting numbers that come out of this. In 2023, they had about 37,000 professional developers. There were more people who answered it, but 37,000 professional developers. And last year, 44% said, yep, we're using AI. Another 25% said, we're going to use it soon. Cool. Fast forward to this year. Same number of people responded, roughly, but 62% of the professional developers are now using it. 14% say soon. But I want you to do some additional math there. When everybody says everybody's doing it, they're not. Almost 25% are not yet using it, and that's okay. So let's talk about where they are using it. Of course, code generation, 82%. The one that I love the most, the answer that I love the most, is searching for answers. People are exchanging their Google skills for prompting skills in using these language models to help them find answers. 48% are using it for debugging, 34% for documentation. Ooh, interesting stat. Only 27% are really using it for software testing, which is up from last year. But there's an additional follow-on statistic. Of those people who are not using it yet, but they're really interested in it, 46% say they want to use it for testing. So when I talk to you about where are the good uses for it, code gen it's okay. That's not where I think the biggest value is. I think it's going to be as we move forward in the testing area. But these are all tools. These are all tasks that we're accomplishing. I thought I said I was going to talk about humans in the loop. Well, I am. So we've started an industry survey. Many of you may have already responded to it. If not, yet another QR code. This will take you to an open survey. It'll be open for a couple of more days. We have a couple hundred responses. Our goal is to ask different questions. We're asking about human-machine collaboration. We're asking about optimizing trust, and not just trust with a tool, but what is happening to trust between team members as we're changing our processes, as we're changing our dynamics. What about skills evolution? Some of the initial data is showing that there are skills that we're losing and some skills that we're going to have to, or that we are increasing, but more that we're losing than we're increasing, but there's a skills change. How's that going to impact us? And I personally want to know, what's your expectation? What do you think is going to happen? What do you need from this or want from it? Because a tool is a tool is a tool is a tool. What matters, as we know from being a DevOps community, is how we empower one another, how we improve the processes. So, I'm doing something very naughty right now. If any of you have ever done formal research, you know that you never look at survey data until the survey is closed. I'm cheating. I looked ahead. In understanding how much cleansing I may have to do in the data, it's both qualitative and quantitative in this survey, I took a peek at this question, which was, what's your most challenging or time-consuming or painful task? Number one, right now, 50% of the responses, 50%, guys, 50%, working with cross-functional teams. And I can raise my hand and say, hell yeah, that's where it gets me. But only 3% so far, only 3% have said that writing new code is a pain or a challenge. And there have been over 40 different challenges that are coming up so far. So please do take this survey, pass it on to either 2 people or 2 teams, because the more data that we get, the more authentic and real this kind of information will be. But this begs the question, doesn't it? Are we addressing the pain points with how we're using generative AI? I don't know that we are. I don't know that we are yet. So for the remainder, I'm going to give you some ideas on specifically using generative AI. The first is my story. This is real. This is from experience. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to work with a team, and we had to go through requirements analysis. So what we did was we got stakeholder and end user buy-in, that we would have interviews and that we would tape them. Yes, showing my age, we would tape them. We would record them and transcribe them. And then we would be allowed to use a language model to do the analysis against it. But we augmented it by crowdsourcing. And it was incredible what we came out with. There were themes that weren't obvious to us at first. Did it give us all of our final requirements that we were ready to run? No. But what an incredible muse. Remember I said automated reasoning before? This is an example of using it for automated reasoning. So lessons learned, every prompt of value, right? Some of your prompts are junk and you learn that, but every prompt of value needs to go into your source control. You need to be able to recreate that. We talked about earlier about being able to reproduce what we do. Also, when you save your prompt, identify what model you're using in the version of that model, because we're seeing as models change, especially if you're using open source models, as those change, it has an impact on your prompts. So you want to keep track of those. Now, where it says diverse data set here, specifically I'm talking about making sure that you have a diverse set of individuals if you're going to go through the analysis process and go through these interviews, because you want to make sure that you have a strong, diverse set of opinions flowing in. And I'm going to continue to beat on this the entire day, the importance of humans in the loop. The QA and the rigorous testing here is making sure that we had folks looking at everything, evaluating it, SMEs, understanding, and looking at those. So it's important. But this is a really cool use case. So this is pretty cool as well. So in January, some research came out that said only 47% of organizations have their testing automated. Hear that. Only 47% of organizations have their testing automated. That means there's a whole lot of folks that don't have it, that they're using manual testing. So does that mean that we leave them by the wayside? No. Actually, we can do some really cool things. We can have the quality engineer, we can have the test professional, we can sit them down with an interface, we can teach them how to do their prompting, their conversational prompting, and they can take their requirements, they can take existing test plans, scenarios, whatever information that they have available to them, and they can use this as a fantastic muse. And it really does work. It's fantastic. And you can also use it for synthetic test data augmentation, and I was careful to use the term augmentation here. I don't use LLMs to do all of my synthetic test generation. I'll come back to that in a moment. But this is another really cool way that you can help your organization to use these things, to use generative AI. So a couple things to be aware of. You definitely have to be concerned about privacy, integrity, data that you're putting into a model, especially if you're not hosting the models flowing outside your boundary. Remember that generative AI is an epic fail when it comes to math. It doesn't do math. If you see somebody with a workflow, a generative AI workflow that is doing math, chances are that they're using an agentic flow, and they've given that agent, right, that other entity, they've given it a tool, and so it's using that separate calculator or math tool. But it's terrible with mathematics. So it fails with math. It also can create nonsensical tests in the same way that you hallucinate, right? Hallucinations, by the way, we talk about it like such a negative thing. Language models are creative by nature, so they have this vivid imagination. How many times have you gone into somebody's office who's a really creative thinker and you've whiteboarded with them, and when you walk out, you're kind of overwhelmed with all the thoughts, but 70 or 80% of what you talked about was just wild-ass stuff, pardon my language, which is kind of crazy. But there was some good stuff there. That's the same thing that can happen with language models. So you can get these nonsensical tests. And transparency, explainability are hyper important for the test professionals, hyper important for the software engineers and the developers. So this technology has groundbreaking potential. So don't get me wrong, not a hater. There are just limits and there are challenges that are changing constantly. I just want you to go in eyes wide open. Well, so no conversation at a DevOps Days would be complete without talking about code generation. So let's talk about it. A lot of the vendors are now using the term code completion. They're rolling back away from saying code generation. I'm not sure if it's for risk purposes or really to get after what's happening. These neural synthesis tools cannot create software. What they can do is generate code, and that's all that they can do. There was a Purdue study that showed that 52% of what's going on with these language models is actually poor quality code. So we have to be cognizant of it. Now, I'm sure that you may be in a situation where you're getting some really good results, but I would challenge you and say, is it always on the first blush? Is it always the first time? There's a stat that GitHub and GitLab and some others are watching, which is first generation acceptance rates. Interesting that on weekends, those numbers skyrocket. So what's the quality? Well, it's whatever was generated the first time around. So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm working with a group called software.com. I just inked a data usage agreement with them. You might have heard of them. They have an add-in to the IDE. And the reason that I've inked this is that I want to get after this massive data set. It has over 500,000 developers and software engineers, all de-identified. But we want to understand how much time are they really spending on coding. Right now, it looks anecdotally about 10 to 20% of the time. 20 was an fringe. Most of it was between 10 and 15% of the time doing that. And it isn't just because people are in meetings. It's because software engineers do more than write code. So it's generally well formatted, right? It's generally well formatted, it's generally well structured. Sometimes it's right, oftentimes it's not. I love this picture. I want to draw your attention to her face, There's a phenomenon called decision fatigue. Decision fatigue. It's been studied for emergency room personnel, for the military, and what decision fatigue is that you have to make high-pressure decisions that are very risky on a consistent basis so that you suffer from decision fatigue. Gang, in what world should software engineers suffer from decision fatigue? I would say, I would hope, zero, or at least only in certain situations. But think about this, where the blue arrow is here. It's showing that in this particular tool, and this was my own usage here, I did my own screen capture, I had 3 different options that I had to flip through to decide which bit of code was going to be the best for my usage. So, decision fatigue is a real thing. Again, groundbreaking potential, limits and challenges. Just be aware. So some things to be concerned about or be aware of. There can be unequal productivity gains. And I will go into a little more depth in this a little bit later. But someone like Brian Finster, I was playing with him and messing with him earlier about this, may get a whole lot of value out of it because the guy's been coding for decades, right? But somebody newer in their career who doesn't know how to make those decisions may not be as productive. And the numbers are starting to show that there's an inequality there. It is fantastic for explaining code, by the way, fantastic. Sits a new developer down, whether they're new in career or new to a domain space, and have them query and explain the code is fantastic for that. Code churn. Have you been following this lately, what code churn is? It's been around for a while, but most of us don't pay attention to it. There's a company called GitClear, and they have been following GitHub, and they're looking at this number called code churn. Code churn is when my code goes into the repo, I check it back out and I make some changes, I check it back in. I check it back out, I make some changes, I check it back in. Churn. Now, some of you would say, of course, you're refactoring to make it better. Well, in the past, those numbers were relatively consistent. From 2020 to 2023, relatively consistent by business area, by business domain. Meaning, we're pretty good at what we do, and yes, we're refactoring. Then why in 2024 is that number set to double, code churn double? Now, am I saying that code generation is causing it? No, I'm not going to claim that because I don't have the data to support that. I'm saying that there's an increase in code churn. We just need to be aware of it. And you'll be seeing correlations, I'm sure, come out about this. So let's see. Less secure code, we've covered that already. Some of the security issues are definitely concerning. There was an industry survey just asking organizations, not going straight to the developers, asking the organizations overall what their concerns were with generated code. And they said privacy security. So the enterprise is aware that there's privacy and security issues. And all the issues are not definitely with the code. They're with other areas within as well. And all of this echoes what we're finding with the Architecture Research Collaborative so far. What people are raising their hand and saying is that security and privacy and regulator concerns. They're concerned if you are in a highly regulated industry, they're worried about that as well. And there's also one other phrase that's come to the surface. I think this is goofy, but I'll share it with you. Insufficient accuracy. Doesn't that sound like a corporate spin? Insufficient accuracy of the code. Did I mention that you need to pay close attention? That generative AI can be unreliable? Notice the emphasis on this picture is on the mentor and not on the apprentice. Because it's his responsibility to pay close attention. His responsibility. How do you do that, though? How do you do that? Right now, how do you do that? Well, we do that through code reviews. We do that through code reviews. I have someone that I work with. His name is Carlton. He has a fairly large organization, and we had a conversation. This was a couple of weeks ago. I said, Carlton, I want to understand, do you execute all of your code reviews in the same way? And we got into a conversation about his rock stars versus his newbies. And new weren't just new in out of school. Those could be new to his organization overall. He said for his rock stars, in particular, we have one or two, and he named them. When he's worked with them for so long, 4 or 5 years, he understands their competencies, their capabilities, their skills, their coding styles. So when he looks at their code reviews, he looks at the diffs, does a quick scan of the diffs. When he is working with someone new in career, he doubles down. He understands the flow. He double checks that the logic is meeting what the business intent is. So he's doing a code review the right way. So I said, let's say that your rock star is under a lot of pressure and you're giving him generative tools. Are you still just going to check the diffs? And his eyes got big. He said, huh. So another study, because I want you to have data to take back for these opinions to be defensible. North Carolina State University has done a study of code reviews and has found that 58% of us cop out and look at the diffs. It's not cool, guys. We've got to amplify that. If you are using pair programming, what you're going to need to do is rotate people more frequently. You may need to have an expert rotate into your pairing as well. But either way, whether you're using code reviews, whether you're using pair programming and doubling down that way, SAST. I can't emphasize it enough. In the last 2 weeks, I've met with both GitLab and GitHub. Both have said, you need SAST. You need to double down on making sure you have as much of a safety net as possible in addition to the humans. So what does that tell you? You've got to pay close attention. What did I say earlier? Has groundbreaking potential, limits and challenges. This may not be as obvious to people. Don't generate the code if you're generating the tests. What I'm saying today may not hold any water in 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, but today, don't generate both. You now will lack that independent verification. You might have some bias slipping in. We've all talked about model bias and what that means. But I want to draw your attention to this phrase, overfitting, and what that means. So overfitting is when there is noise in the data that was used to train the model. And what happens is that the model can become hyper-focused in a certain area of your code base. I'm sure that many of you have been interacting with one of the language models, and it's gotten to a point where it seems like it has blinders on, and no matter what question you ask, it gets into stupid mode. The same thing can happen if you're generating both your code and your tests. So just be cognizant of that. Just be cognizant of it. So, is your organization prepared? You ready for this? You ready for generative AI? How's your SDLC? Is your organization, do they have a lot of friction? Right? Are there a lot of handoffs? What's the flow actually look like? If you don't address the existing issues, if you simply sprinkle a little AI on it, you might make a bigger mess of it. You might make a bigger mess of it. So today and tomorrow are all about sharing our experiences, right? This is DevOps days. So we're going to hear a lot about different techniques and technologies, different approaches. I am going to give you just a couple of quick things. Go back to the basics when you're talking about fixing your SDLC, and I'll give you one question to start with. This is a question I normally ask if I get parachuted into an organization. I will say to them, do you own your path to production? And I mean from vision to fielded operations, do you own that? And in asking that single question, it will surface dozens and dozens of issues. You don't even have to go into an entire value stream mapping exercise at that point. Just asking that question will surface a lot. So that's the question that you can ask when you go back and you're working with your organization. And I'm going to give you 2 sets of resources. DORA, we all know the DORA metrics, but I would urge you to go out and look at the DORA research pages because it explains the different entities and the different interaction of those entities that impact the metrics themselves. You have to understand what levers you have, what you need to do in order to change those metrics. But the metrics for what? Well, the metrics for doing minimum CD. So minimum CD is an open source effort. A couple of us, including my friend Brian Finster and I, in 2021, I guess there were 7 in addition to Brian and I, so 9 of us, bellied up to the virtual bar during the DevOps Enterprise Summit. And we were frustrated that everybody's got a damn excuse for why they can't adopt DevOps principles. You don't have to do it all at once, but they had just myriad reasons why they couldn't do it. So we said, let's put some open source guidance together and make it available to anybody. And so there is, if you follow that QR code, I keep pointing at the screen back here, and there's no screen back here, but if you look at that, if you go to that minimum CD, you can join us as a maintainer. You can join us as one of the folks who are contributing to it. But at the end of the day, you'll get an amazing amount of information on how to do the minimums. The minimums, because you start with the minimums. So continuous integration, learning about your application pipeline, it's the only way to deploy to production, the only way. And your pipeline is what determines the releasability of your changes. Only the pipeline. You have made the decision on what the pipeline does, but you ultimately are delegating to the pipeline to make that decision on what can be releasable and allowing the verdict to be definitive. So I took you down this path just as a reminder that DevOps matters. The principles that we've learned, the things that we've been focused on for a long time, it matters. It really matters. I love this picture. Isn't he a cutie? It's nobody that I know. It's from Unsplash, but just the most darling picture. So let's talk about just a couple of gotchas. Adaptation of your workflow. You might say to yourself, well, of course, yeah, we're going to have to change our workflow. What that means, though, is that your measures and your metrics may change. And if you have somebody who's a metrics watcher, they need to be aware that things are going to waver and that that is okay. So you need to set the expectation that measurements will change. It's okay. Training becomes a must anytime you are tinkering with your processes because people are resistant to change, and the best way to address that is through training. And what about productivity? We're going to spend a bit of time here, gang. I go on rants about this all the time, and I apologize in advance that this will be another rant with data underneath it. There's a concept called perceived productivity. Perceived productivity means that what I self-manifest, what I self-report, and the observable data don't match. And with the adoption of generative AI tools into the software development lifecycle, we're seeing oftentimes that it is perceived productivity and not realized productivity. So that Stack Overflow report, right, they had 39,000 different professional developers this year respond to it. Folks believe that the biggest benefit is going to be to their productivity. It's going to be to their productivity. Because ChatGPT, it's going to automate the tedious, right? It's going to help me to do those mundane things. But at the end of the day, we don't measure our ability to deliver software into production based on individuals. We base it on teams, team productivity, team delivery into production. I care dramatically about what happens with my team and their individual experiences and their individual productivity, but I don't measure that way. So let me throw some other data at you so that you have this. MIT, GitHub, and Microsoft did a study together, and it was about AI pair programming. And one of the statistics that came out of it was that you can complete your tasks 58% faster. Complete the task. Does that say anything about the quality of the outputs? It doesn't. It just says that you're doing it faster. So last night I got a notification from my legal department that we had inked an NDA with a group called Blue Optima. And I'm super excited about this. If you've been following some of the things that are coming out of Blue Optima, they have data from working in a highly regulated industry. They work with banking. They work with four of the world's top 10 banks. And they are looking at a myriad, I like that word, they're looking at all of these different data points when code gets changed. They're not simply looking at how many lines were generated. They claim to be looking at something like 36 different metadata points. Why this matters, and as soon as I have enough information that I'm allowed to share with you, I will broadcast it out. They're claiming right now that in an organization that adopts generative AI into the software development lifecycle, a 4% gain of productivity. And productivity includes code quality, macabre, cyclomatic complexity, security challenges. They're including all of those different things. So we need to get to the bottom of it, but I'm taking you back to, what's productivity mean? What's productivity mean? So let's keep moving on. The importance of context. What's important for you to take home from this is that the more context that you provide to a language model, the better it does. That also means that the more of your information that you need to provide into a language model in order to get the context for what you're doing. Now, you can augment those things with RAG, that you can self-host, but if you're using an externally hosted model, just be aware. I'm not saying don't, I'm saying go in eyes wide open. Are folks okay with your IP flowing outside your boundary? That's all. Did I mention? Keep humans in the loop? Always, always keep humans in the loop. Quick summary of our leading practices so far. Keep humans in the loop. Everything in source control. Secure your vulnerabilities. Don't let your IP flow outside unless you're okay with that. SAST is important. It's your responsibility to be mentoring others in your organization, right? Tons of leading practices. But let's take it up to the big picture for just a moment. This QR code is just the same one that takes you to the downloads page. From a big picture perspective, you need to have an AI strategy. Oftentimes, this will be augmented into your data strategy. If your organization has one, read it. If it doesn't have one, maybe hint that they should. It'll help to establish governance. Governance is important. I'm not talking about dogmatic, draconian governance, but you have to have some measure of governance. And you need to be managing the risks. There are also a ton of questions that you want to ask whoever is providing your AI. Now, if you are the group in your organization that provides, that hosts the AI capabilities, you're going to want to be able to answer these questions. But it's things like your model quality, data corpus, security, the roadmap of your model. So if you go out, there are a couple of question sets that you can download that you can take home and ask. Choosing when and where to start. Many of you may have already been playing with code generation, that's fine. But I would suggest to you that you move away from novelty and define a business case. Work with your organization and define a specific use case. Think about the SDLC. How many different dozens of tasks are there? There are many. So define a place where you want to start and define the why as well as how you're going to measure it. And if you need help, DM me. We've got a little decision support gizmo tool that we can walk through. It takes a couple of minutes. It'll help you to clearly articulate what your risk profile is and how you're going to try and measure these things. Designing your tool chain. I'm a software architect. It's the same decision sets that I would make for what goes into my ultimate production design. So I need to do those architectural trade-offs. I may want something that's off the shelf. Why do I want it from off the shelf? It might be faster, but it might not be as tailored to what I need. It may have more security gaps in it, but I'm okay with that because it meets a specific business imperative. Okay. Or I may want it to be much more customized. I work with MITRE, and we've made a decision that we're not using GitLab. We're not, at least not external. We do have internal. We're not using GitHub. We do host 7 different enterprise models, right? They're open source, but we're hosting them, and we use, for our developers, we use an add-in called Continue. So we've made that decision a little bit more on the customized side, not dramatically, but we're not using the externals. But these are just decisions that you need to make, right? Eyes wide open. So let's look ahead. This is the fun stuff, guys. There's a growing role of digital platforms. I had a really good conversation this morning, a group over here, and we were bemoaning the fact that platform engineering, right? Black is the new orange, orange is the new black, whatever you want to say. Platform engineering has been around for a long, long time. So I'm not going to get into a conversation of should we have it or shouldn't we have it. The fact of the matter is that platforms matter. Platforms, period, matter. I have worked with low-code and no-code platforms for a long time, and I really appreciate them. A lot of folks in the custom development world are really haters. Don't be. Because now we have low-code, no-code, and pro-code. That's what I would call those platform engineering bits. And what we're trying to do with all of them is help people to make fewer mistakes. Right? We're want to improve the quality, maybe accelerate the time, but with highly opinionated leading practices of our own organization. Why do you care about this at all when we're talking about generative AI? It's because this is going to be the point where we are going to start to see the introduction of generative AI, how we're going to do additional augmentation, where the future agentics go into this as we move across. So what does the SDLC look like? Well, today, some of the research that I was doing was supposed to answer over the last 8 months, how has it changed? And I can tell you, the SDLC hasn't changed yet. It hasn't. Because there's too much churn that's going on right now. And if you look at this diagram, where it says there's more data silos, slower flow, quality issues, you're probably saying, no, no, no. But think about each one of those bullet points is another tool with another data store behind it, with another conversation, with another session. These are not underneath an umbrella so that session is shared. When I'm spending hours working against a GPT, 1, 2, 3 GPTs, when I'm working against those, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of that conversation that gets lost, right? Our group think gets lost. So we're going to see that continue. And again, this isn't an opinion. I have had interviews with researchers from Microsoft. I've talked to ThoughtWorks. I had the blessing of working with a couple of people from IT Revolution, Yahoo, SEI, the Software Engineering Institute, Google, yes, MITRE, and we're all at the same place. We're all drawing the same conclusions. The data's all showing the same thing. For right now, remember what I said earlier? In 2 months, everything I say, maybe a little bit of bunk. What about this? Do you think the future of coding is dead? Do you think what Jensen brought up is correct? Some of the data shows that it's going to dramatically change. That's okay. It's going to dramatically change. There is an expert, like I think is, let me look it up, Alan Fern. He's at Oregon State University, and they've been doing research on this. And essentially, they're saying that if you're qualified to do your job right now, if you know what you're doing, these tools are not going to replace you. They're going to enhance you. But to cognition AI, to the big Devon rush, are we going to suddenly have a software engineer? Now, I would say to you that with agentics, we are going to see the addition of autonomous AI agents, right, into the software development lifecycle. And it will start small. It'll start very, very small. But is it suddenly going to be replacing us in quite the same way? I would say no. No, not yet. But let me take you on a little journey. Let me take you back to 1939. Anybody know what happened in 1939? Many things. Hopefully not too many history buffs out here to call me out. Technicolor. Technicolor. Do you guys remember The Wizard of Oz? And the movie starts, they had been filming it in black and white. But they decided there was a dramatic moment where the twister is coming and Dorothy runs into the house and the tornado picks up her house and lofts it over the rainbow. And the door swings open and what happens? She looks out at Munchkin Land and it's in Technicolor. It looks completely different. It's vibrant, it's exciting, and it's scary. Isn't that where we are right now? Sort of? Yeah, we are. We need to figure out AI-human teaming. Right now, AI is only a tool. It is only a tool. That entire SDLC, all of those different places where you can leverage it, it's just a tool. And as we look at adding agents, as we look at providing a very small set of responsibilities that we can carefully watch over time, we're likely to see more of that. And I'm not talking about the AI agents that we may see today that are kind of glorified RPA, glorified workflows. I'm talking about allowing an algorithm to own a responsibility set. So how are we going to optimize for that? Do you guys realize that Agile DevOps. It's all optimized for humans. Think about it. Why do we limit work in process? Right? Work in progress, why? Well, because humans make mistakes. We worry about cognitive overload. Why? Because humans make mistakes. We've been writing really, really crappy code and turning out really bad software into production for, what, 50, 60 years? We are going to be able to use these agentics to help us in the future. We are. So we can't put the genie back in the bottle, but why don't I have a picture of a genie? Well, I'll tell you. Because a friend of mine from the great old state of Texas, Lonnie Rosales, she runs American Genius, she's CEO and publisher there, was having a conversation with me one day. She said, Trace, you know there are stories where you can trick the genie back into the bottle. She said a better analogy was to say, you can't put the poo back in the horse. Now, she used a much more terse word than that, but the analogy is correct. We can't put the poo back in the horse. Prompt engineering is a discipline now. We have to be worried about the ethics of the prompt, even the prompt, not just the data, but we have to worry about the ethics of the prompt. Human-machine teaming, trust, 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 trust. We have to figure it out. Trust in the outcomes, trust in the algorithms, trust in one another, right? We can't put the poo back in the horse. Or more simply stated, we can't go back. But here's what you can do. Quick call to action. Focus on cybersecurity. My work with the federal government and her allies, it just screams out that we need to be first and foremost worried about cybersecurity. Make it your highest priority no matter what. Make sure you're doing research or that your organization is doing research about this and put in place some reasonable guardrails. Autonomy is not meant that anybody can decide about anything that they want to. There are scopes of autonomy. What a team can decide is different than what a portfolio can decide, is different than what an enterprise can decide. So put some things in place. And check out those question sets. Ask about model quality, ask about security, ask about roadmaps. Now I've got one thing that I need from you. Actually, it's a list of things that I need from you. So over the course of today, or if we don't get to talk today, let's make sure that we take time over the next couple of weeks. I want to know how you think the SDLC is going to change. How's your organization preparing for it right now? What are you personally focused on? So I want to know your stories. I want us to be able to share these in the same way that we do about the core of DevOps. I want to be able to share how all of these things are going to be impacting us, because all of the research that I'm doing, everything that I do, it actually becomes part of the public domain. I don't make any money from it. It's volunteer. It goes out to all of you. Did I mention that we have to be focused on the very most important thing, which is the humans? That's what matters. Our technicolored future matters. Our technicolored future is built on us worrying about the humans. So with that, I'll leave you with the same QR code that'll take you to the same set of materials. And I thank you for your time today, guys. This has been fun.